I knew I had to escape the day I found my mother's wedding dress. It wasn't stored in a trunk in the attic. It was hanging in my brother's closet, obsessively ironed, ready for a ceremony. I was 15. He was 22. And he had decided that I, his only sister, would be the one to wear it. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was looking for a vessel to create an heir with pure Morgan blood. After our parents' death, our isolated ranch became a prison. And this is the story of how I fought for the key. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, please leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they shake what you believe. There are stories, no matter how painful, that must be told. I was born in 1943 on a ranch called Red Ash Ranch, lost in the pine forests of North Florida, near a little town that barely even appeared on the map, Golden Hill. It was a pretty place, but far too isolated. To get there, it was only by wagon or horseback, on a dirt road that turned into an endless mud pit when it rained. We were practically a world apart. My father, Walter Morgan, was an austere man, the kind who rarely smiled, but who had a strong sense of justice. He worked from sunup to sundown, tending the tobacco fields and the small herd of cattle. My mother, Clara, was the opposite, always humming nursery rhymes while she cooked on the wood-fired stove. She had long, black hair, always in a braid, and calloused hands from so much work, but still delicate when she took care of me. My older brother, Stephen, was born 7 years before me. From a young age, I noticed that my father treated him differently. It wasn't the same affection, the same closeness he had with me. Back then, I thought it was just a kid thing, that fathers and sons have a different way of relating. Only much later would I understand the reason for that distance. Our house was large, but simple. Cypress wood walls, a packed earth floor covered by woven palmetto rugs that my mother made herself. It had 4 rooms. My parents' room, the room I shared with my brother until I turned 6. After that, I slept in a corner of the living room, separated by a curtain my mother sewed. The kitchen with the stove always lit, and a living room where we received rare visitors. The days on the ranch always followed the same rhythm. We woke up with the rooster's crow before the sun came up. My mother was already up, lighting the stove to make the strong black coffee my father drank before heading to the fields. I helped feed the chickens and gather the eggs while Stephen went with my father for the farm chores. The afternoons were my favorite hours. After finishing helping my mother with the house chores, I could play a little. I made corn husk dolls with hair made from corn silk, dressed in scraps of fabric left over from my mother's mending. I also liked to climb the pecan trees loaded with nuts and stay up there, watching the world around me, dreaming of distant places I only knew from the stories the teacher told at the rural schoolhouse, where I only studied up to the 4th grade. My best friend was Sadie, the daughter of the foreman from the neighboring ranch. We would meet on Sundays after church, when the families gathered for a potluck lunch on the church lawn. We played Ring Around the Rosie, singing songs, and London Bridge is Falling Down, while the adults talked about the harvest and the weather. It was a simple life, but happy in its own way, at least until I was 12, when everything changed. It was in 1955, late August, after a heavy rain that lasted 3 whole days. The river that ran near the ranch overflowed, flooding the crops and dragging away part of our livestock. My father, desperate to save what was left of the animals, went into the water on his horse. He never came back. They found his body 2 days later, trapped in branches on the riverbank, already a few miles from our property. My mother was devastated. Suddenly, that cheerful woman who hummed all day turned into a silent shadow. She barely ate, barely slept. Stephen, who was already 19, took control of the ranch. At first, it seemed almost good to have my older brother taking charge of things, taking care of us. He always seemed strong, decisive, knowing what to do in any situation. But there was something in his eyes that was changing, little by little, something I only noticed much later. My mother wasted away inside for months. Sadness consumed her like a slow fire, until a high fever finally struck her down. The town doctor came to examine her and said it was pneumonia, but I believe it was a broken heart. She couldn't bear to be without my father. She died holding my hand, asking me to be strong and take good care of the house and my brother. I had just turned 13. It was then that I began to notice the first changes in Stephen's behavior. He became even more withdrawn. He would spend hours looking at our parents' portraits, especially our father's face. Sometimes I'd catch him talking to himself in his room, as if he were arguing with someone who wasn't there. Other times, I'd find him in Dad's office, going through old documents, letters stored in a carved wooden box that Dad had kept locked while he was alive. His gaze changed too. When he looked at me, it was no longer with that older brotherly affection. It was a different look, like someone observing an object, a property, something that belonged to him. I didn't understand it well back then, but I felt a chill in my stomach every time we were alone. This land is ours, Alice. It's in our blood. Everything we are is tied to this place. And now it's just you and me, he would tell me, in a voice that no longer sounded like the brother I knew. The neighbors started to drift away. The few friendships we had dwindled as if the sadness in our house were contagious. Or maybe it was something else, something in Stephen's behavior that pushed people away. That transition from brother to jailer is terrifying because it happens so slowly. It's a reminder that sometimes the deepest-seated evil is found right in our own homes, and Alice is just beginning to realize how trapped she is. Even Sadie, my childhood friend, stopped coming to visit after Stephen threw her out one afternoon, saying I had too many chores around the house to be wasting time with games. I became more and more isolated on that ranch. The world shrank until it was only him and me. School, which was already far, became impossible to attend because Stephen said he couldn't take me and pick me up every day. You already know how to read and write. What more schooling do you need? Women need to know how to take care of a house, he repeated, whenever I asked to go back to class. That's how my childhood ended, with mourning the loss of my parents and the growing fear of what my own brother was becoming. I didn't know it yet, but the worst was yet to come, when Stephen's strange gaze would finally reveal his true intentions. Everything truly began to change in the winter of 1957. I was 14 and starting to become a young woman. My body was changing, and no matter how much I tried to hide it under the loose-fitting dresses I inherited from my mother, Stephen began to look at me in a way that made my skin crawl, and it wasn't from the cold. By that time, the ranch was no longer the same. After the flood that took my father, many things were lost. The few remaining ranch hands left one by one, scared off by Stephen's authoritarian manner. Even Mr. Harold, who had worked with my father since before I was born, ended up leaving after Stephen accused him of stealing tools from the barn. We were left more and more alone in that vastness. The big house, once full of life and voices, now echoed with emptiness. The days dragged on between hard work and the heavy silence of the nights. Stephen spent more and more time locked in what used to be Dad's office, drinking moonshine and rummaging through those old papers. One night, I was in the kitchen finishing washing the dinner pots when Stephen came in stumbling, reeking of moonshine. He leaned against the doorframe and just watched me for a time that felt like an eternity. I pretended not to notice, scrubbing hard at a stain that wasn't even there on the bottom of that iron pot. "Did you know you're starting to look just like our mother?" he said in a slurred voice. "The same way you move your hands, the same shape of your face." I muttered an uncomfortable thank you, because even in my fear, I thought it was a compliment. My mother was beautiful, and I missed her every day. He came closer, and the strong smell of moonshine, mixed with sweat, made me take a step back. "This land, Alice, this land is all we have. It's the legacy of the Morgan family." He looked out the window into the darkness outside, where we knew the fields, now poorly tended, stretched out. "Dad fought his whole life to keep this, and now it's my responsibility, our responsibility." I nodded, still not understanding where he was going with this. Stephen took another step in my direction and grabbed my chin hard, forcing me to look into his eyes. "You know what the name Morgan means, don't you? It comes from the sea, vast and strong. That's what we are. And roots need to spread, you understand? They need to continue." I didn't understand at that moment, but I felt an icy chill run down my spine. Something in his gaze warned me that this conversation wasn't normal. It wasn't the kind of thing a brother says to a sister. It was that same night that he came into my makeshift room for the first time. I pretended to be asleep, but I heard the curtain being carefully pulled aside. I felt his weight as he sat on the edge of my bed. For long minutes, he just stayed there, watching me in the dim light. Then he left without saying anything. But from then on, it became a routine. Almost every night, especially when he drank more, he would come and sit there, sometimes whispering things about the land, about the family, about responsibilities. The weeks went by, and his behavior became stranger. He started to control my every move. I couldn't even go to the creek to wash clothes by myself anymore. He said it was dangerous, that the same thing that happened to Dad could happen to me. "You're all I have left, Alice, all the Morgan family has. I need to protect you." But it wasn't protection I felt in his eyes, it was possession. One day, he came home with a new dress for me, a dress that looked more like a married woman's than a girl's. "It was Mom's," he said. "I found it stored in a trunk in the attic. I asked not to wear it." I said I preferred my simple dresses, he insisted, with that look that didn't accept refusal. I started wearing that dress to avoid trouble. It was pretty, a faded blue, with little embroidered flowers on the neckline, but every time I wore it, I felt as if I were transforming into someone else, as if Stephen were trying to erase Alice and bring back something that no longer existed. It was in the spring of 1958. I was already 15, that things took a turn for the worse. We were sitting on the porch after dinner, as we used to enjoy the cool night air, when Stephen started talking about the future of the ranch. "We need more people here, Alice. A ranch doesn't prosper without people to work it, without a strong family." "We can hire more hands," I suggested innocently. He laughed, a dry laugh that had no joy in it. "Hired hands come and go. Family stays. The Morgan blood needs to continue on this land." It was then that I understood, with an icy horror, what he really meant. The Morgan blood. Continuation. Family. That night, when he came to my room, he didn't just sit and watch. He lay down beside me, ran his hand through my hair like my mother used to when I was little, only there was nothing maternal in that gesture. "One day you'll understand, Alice. This land needs heirs. It needs a new generation of Morgans." I feigned sleep, my heart pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. The mask is completely off. The vague fear has just been given a horrifying, specific name: heir. Alice is no longer a sister to him. She is a means to an end. When he finally left, I cried silently until dawn. From then on, I started sleeping with a piece of wood under my mattress, a fence post I hid during the day. I didn't know exactly what I would do with it, but it gave me a little security. For days, I tried to think of how to escape. But where would I go? I had no money. I didn't know anyone in town who could help me. Besides, Stephen kept the ranch's only mule tied up in a pasture near the house, and I knew I could never get away on foot on the road without him catching me. It was on a Sunday afternoon that everything reached its limit. Stephen had gone to town in the morning, which was rare, to buy salt and other provisions we were missing. I took advantage of being alone to search his room, looking for any hidden money that could help me flee. I didn't find any money, but I found something worse. In a corner of the closet, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was Mom's wedding dress, clean and pressed, as if it were ready to be worn. Beside it, a small wooden box. Inside, her wedding ring. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a brother with wrong thoughts about his sister. It was a plan, a sick plan that had been in the works for a long time. That was the moment a child's vague fear turned into an adult's terrible reality. It was no longer if, it was when. I knew then that I couldn't just pray anymore. I had to save myself. I barely had time to put everything back in its place when I heard the mule's trot approaching. I ran to the kitchen and pretended to be busy preparing lunch. Stephen came in, carrying the groceries, more cheerful than usual. He had even bought some candy from town, something he hadn't done since we were kids. That sudden kindness made me even more uneasy. "We need to talk, Alice," he said after lunch, while I was washing the dishes. "I have plans for us, for the future of the ranch." I nodded, not having the courage to look at him. I knew what was coming, And I also knew I needed to buy time, prepare some kind of escape. That night, he didn't come to my room. Instead, he stayed in the living room, drinking more than usual. I could hear him talking to himself, sometimes laughing, sometimes cursing. He mentioned Dad's name several times, as if he were arguing with him. Through the crack in the curtain, I saw when he finally got up, staggering, and headed to his room. I waited until I was sure he was asleep, and then I took my piece of wood and went to the office. If there was any chance of finding hidden money, it would be there. I also wanted to check those papers that fascinated Stephen so much, to see if there was anything that explained why he had turned into this unrecognizable person. The office was locked, but I knew the key was hidden on top of the kitchen cabinet. I took it and, careful not to make noise, opened the door. The moonlight streamed through the window, partially illuminating the dark wooden desk where my father used to do the ranch's accounts. On it, scattered, were several papers. I got closer to see better. They were ranch documents, deeds, and a letter in my mother's handwriting, addressed to my father. It was open, and the date at the top showed it had been written even before I was born. I started to read, and every word was like a stab in the chest. Walter, I need to tell you the truth about the boy. Stephen is not your son. I couldn't finish reading. A noise from the hallway alerted me. I quickly put the letter back where it was and hid behind the curtain, still holding my piece of wood. Stephen came in, lighting the kerosene lamp. Even in the dim light, I could see his eyes were red, and not just from the drink, it looked like he had been crying. He spent a few minutes rummaging through the papers, muttering words I couldn't quite understand. Then he took the same letter I had been reading and tore it into small pieces. Then he took other documents from a drawer and did the same. When he finally left, taking the kerosene lamp with him, I let out the breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. That letter, that secret, that's what explained so many things. My father's distance from Stephen, his obsession with the continuation of the Morgan blood, but now he had destroyed the proof, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that the situation would only get worse from then on. The next morning, Stephen was different, more determined, more controlled. He didn't seem at all affected by the previous night's drunkenness. "We're going to town today," he announced at breakfast. "I have business to take care of." My heart sped up. It was my chance to ask someone for help. I agreed, trying not to show the relief I felt. But then he added, "Go get ready. Put on Mom's blue dress. I want to introduce you to Father Patrick." Father Patrick, the priest of the small church in Golden Hill. The reality hit me like a punch in the stomach. Stephen was planning some kind of marriage, a farce to legitimize his sick intentions. He's moving fast now, using the church itself to sanctify something so profane. Alice is completely out of time. She has to make a move, or it will be too late. It was then I realized I had no more time. I would have to act that very day, or it would be too late. As I got dressed, I mentally reviewed every corner of the ranch, every possible escape route, every hiding place. And that's when I remembered the attic. There was an old trunk up there, where Mom kept things of sentimental value. Maybe there would be more letters, more proof of the secret Stephen was trying to hide. If I could find that proof, before we went to town, maybe I'd have a weapon against him, something I could use as leverage for my freedom. "Stephen," I called from my bedroom doorway. "I need more time to get ready. Mom's dress needs to be taken in at the waist. It's too loose." He seemed impatient but agreed. "Don't take too long. I want to get to town before noon." As soon as he went out to get the mule ready, I ran to the trap door that led to the attic. The ladder was dusty, a sign that no one had been up there in a long time. The space was cramped and dark, full of cobwebs and old trunks. That's when I saw, in a more secluded corner, a trunk different from the others. It had a padlock, but it was ajar, as if someone had tried to close it in a hurry. Inside I found a smaller, carved wooden box, and in it, letters, many letters. I didn't have time to read everything, but enough to understand. Stephen was not my father's biological son. He was the result of an affair my mother had before she got married. My father knew, but he accepted him as his son to avoid scandal. However, he could never love him as a true son. In one of the letters, my mother begged my father's forgiveness, promising to be a faithful wife for the rest of his life. In another, my father replied that he forgave her, but that it would be difficult to look at Stephen without remembering the betrayal. Now everything made sense. Stephen's obsession with the land, with the Morgan name, with the continuation of the bloodline. He was a man trying to prove his belonging to a family that biologically wasn't his. Do you see the irony, child? The very thing a person lacks is often the one thing they become obsessed with possessing. He didn't truly need Morgan blood. He needed proof of ownership. And I, sadly, was the only thing he could take to create that twisted proof. And I was the only legitimate Morgan left, the only true connection to the land he so desperately wanted to possess. Alice, where are you, girl? Stephen's shout made me jump. I quickly put the letters back in the box and tucked it under my arm. I climbed down the attic ladder as quietly as I could, but he was already in the hallway. What were you doing up there? I tried to hide the box behind me, but he was faster. He snatched it from my hands with a rough movement. Upon seeing the contents, his face twisted into a mask of fury. Where did you find this? Where? I backed up until my back hit the wall. There was nowhere to run. In the attic, I answered in a trembling voice. So, it's true. You're not Dad's son? It was like lighting the fuse of a dynamite stick. Stephen threw the box to the floor with such force that the letters scattered across the hallway. Then he advanced on me, grabbing my arms hard enough to leave marks. I am his son. Yes, I am a Morgan. This land is mine by right. His breath smelled of moonshine, even though it was still morning. His eyes had a feverish glint that terrified me. In that moment, I understood I wasn't just dealing with an obsessed man, but with someone who had completely lost his sanity. And you, Alice, he continued, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. You will help me prove it. We're going to have a son with pure Morgan blood, and then no one can say I don't belong to this family. He dragged me down the hall to his room, throwing me onto the bed violently. It was the first time he crossed that line, that he went from insinuations to action. I won't stop until your belly swells, he shouted as he unbuckled his belt. I want a son of mine on this land. I closed my eyes, feeling the tears run down my face. In that moment of absolute desperation, my hands fumbled blindly on the bed, searching for something, anything that could help me. And they found the small hunting knife that Stephen always kept under his pillow, with a buckhorn handle and a sharp blade he used to cut chewing tobacco. What happened next was like a hazy dream. I just remember a quick movement, his scream, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, I saw the knife in my hand, the blade stained red. Stephen was on the floor, clutching his shoulder, where a deep cut was pouring blood. I didn't wait to see more. I ran as I had never run before. I grabbed the box with the letters in the hallway and dashed out of the house. The mule was tied to the post, already saddled for our trip to town. I mounted it without a second thought and spurred the animal with all the strength I had. I heard Stephen yelling from the house door, but I didn't look back. I only stopped when I reached the town, in front of the sheriff's office. I was shaking so much I could barely hold the reins. When I entered, covered in dust and tears, Sheriff Dennis stood up from his chair, startled by my state. When you run for your life, you don't think. You just run. It's only when you stop that you feel the wounds. I wasn't just running from Stephen. I was running toward life. That makes all the difference. I told him everything, showing the letters as proof of what Stephen intended to do to me. At first, he seemed reluctant to believe it. These are family matters, girl, he said. But when he read some of the letters, and especially when he saw my arms, bruised from Stephen's grip, his expression changed. You'll stay here until we sort this situation out, he decided, taking me to his house, where his wife, Mrs. Joyce, received me with a cup of tea and kind words. That night, lying in a clean bed for the first time in a long time, I cried until I had no tears left. I cried for my parents, for the brother I once loved, for my lost childhood, for my stolen innocence. But also, for the first time, I allowed myself to feel hope. The protection I found in Sheriff Dennis's house was short-lived. Just 3 days after my escape, I received news that would change everything. Stephen had gone to town with his arm bandaged, and a very different story from mine. He said you tried to kill him while he was sleeping, the sheriff explained, his face grim. He said you stole important documents from the ranch and that you've been disturbed ever since your parents died. But the letters, I tried to argue, clutching the wooden box to my chest. They prove what he intended to do. The sheriff sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Alice, understand. These are old family letters. They don't prove anything about what happened between you two, and he has a witness. I froze. A witness? What witness? Father Patrick. Stephen took him to the ranch yesterday, showed him his room with blood on the floor. He told him you'd been having strange ideas about him not being your real brother. The father confirmed that your brother had been expressing concern about your mental state for weeks. I couldn't believe it. Stephen had planned everything. He had probably been laying the groundwork for some time, planting doubts about my sanity in the minds of the townspeople. And there's more, the sheriff continued, avoiding my eyes. Stephen is your legal guardian. You're a minor, and the law says you must be in his custody. It's just devastating. The one system designed to protect her has just condemned her. This is why these stories must be told. The law doesn't always equal justice. It was as if the floor opened up beneath me. I know many of you hearing this will be angry. Why was the law like that? That's how it was back then, my dear. The law often protected property, and in that isolated place, a minor was seen as little more than property of their guardian. It's why the kindness of a stranger, like Mrs. Joyce, was sometimes stronger than the law itself. I would go back to the ranch with that man who now, on top of everything, had reasons to hate me even more. Please, I begged, grabbing the sheriff's arm. Don't send me back. He'll kill me. Or worse. Mrs. Joyce, who was listening from the kitchen doorway, came closer, her eyes firm. Dennis, this girl is terrified. We cannot hand her back. The sheriff looked genuinely distressed, his sense of duty warring with his conscience. The law is clear, Joyce, and without concrete proof of what she alleges. Then bend the law, Dennis, Mrs. Joyce insisted, her voice low and fierce. That man's lying. I see it in this child's eyes. You buy her time. That's all I'm asking. That's how I gained a few more days, but Stephen's shadow loomed over me like a storm cloud. Never forget the power of kindness. In the moment I believed the whole world had turned its back, Mrs. Joyce, almost a stranger, dared to bend the law for me. Courage isn't always holding a gun. Sometimes it's just offering a hand in the dark. He came to the sheriff's office every day demanding my return, each time more irritated, each time more threatening. On the fifth night, Mrs. Joyce came into the small room where I was sleeping and woke me urgently. Get up, child, we have to go now. Go where? I asked, confused by the sudden awakening. Far away from here. Dennis is distracting your brother at the sheriff's office. He says he found new evidence and needs his presence there. In the meantime, I'm taking you to my sister's house in Atlanta. It's far enough for you to start over. I didn't need to hear any more. In minutes, I had my few clothes in a bundle, climbing into the wagon driven by Mrs. Joyce's oldest son, a quiet young man named Tyler. We traveled all night on back roads, avoiding the main routes. By dawn, we were many miles from Golden Hill, but the fear didn't leave me. At every turn in the road, at every noise in the woods, I jumped, thinking it was Stephen catching up to us. Atlanta was a much bigger city, with wide, busy streets, that scared me after so much time in the isolation of the ranch. Mrs. Joyce's sister, Rebecca, was a widow and worked as a seamstress. She received me with a silent hug and eyes that already knew pain. You'll stay in the back room, she said, showing me a small but clean space. And starting tomorrow, you'll help me with the sewing. Busy hands calm, a tormented mind. I spent the first few days in a constant state of alert. I barely slept, jumping at any noise. When I needed to go out to buy thread or deliver some sewing work, I kept my head down, always looking over my shoulder. Mrs. Rebecca noticed my state. One night, after dinner, she sat next to me and took my hands in hers. Child, you need to understand one thing. Fear is like a weed. If you let it, it grows deep roots and suffocates everything around it. We need to pull that weed out." I didn't answer. How could I explain to her that it wasn't just fear? It was a certainty, an intimate knowledge that Stephen would never give up on finding me, that for him, I wasn't just a sister, but a possession, the living proof of his belonging to that land and that name. The months went by. I learned the seamstress trade with dedication. I had a talent for embroidery, according to Mrs. Rebecca. I created designs of leaves and roots that the clients loved. Ironic how the very thing that terrified me so much, roots, became my form of expression. It was on an afternoon in November 1959, more than a year after my escape, that the past caught up with me. I was alone in the house. Mrs. Rebecca had gone to deliver a wedding dress to a client on the other side of the city. I heard knocks on the door, loud, insistent. I froze. Something about those knocks awakened memories I was trying to bury. I remained motionless, barely breathing, hoping that whoever it was would give up and leave. "I know you're in there, Alice." Stephen's voice from the other side of the door froze the blood in my veins. How had he found me? How long had he been looking for me? To this day, I still don't know exactly how he found me. But I know this. Obsession is a fire that never goes out. It will burn down everything just to find what it wants. Never, ever underestimate the power of madness, child. "Open the door. I just want to talk." I backed away to the far end of the house, desperately looking for a back exit. But the only back door had been locked by Mrs. Rebecca before she left, and I didn't know where she kept the key. The knocking continued, getting louder. "Alice, I know you're in there alone. The old seamstress left a while ago." I saw her. He had been watching me. For how long? Days, weeks. The thought made me sick. "If you don't open up, I'm going to break the door down." "You know I can." That voice. After more than a year of safety, the monster is back. Obsession is a fire that never goes out, and it will burn down everything just to find what it wants. I looked around, searching for something to defend myself with. My eyes landed on Mrs. Rebecca's large sewing shears on the work table. I grabbed them tightly, feeling the cold metal against my palm. The crash of the door being forced echoed through the small house. I heard the wood splintering, the hinges giving way, and then he was there, standing in the middle of the living room with the same obsessed expression that populated my nightmares. He was thinner, with an unshaven beard and deep dark circles. The arm I had injured looked stiff. Maybe it hadn't healed completely, but it was his gaze that terrified me, that feverish glint of someone who has lost their mind. "I finally found you," he said, taking a step in my direction. "You have no idea the trouble you gave me, but I knew I'd find you. Blood calls to blood, Alice." I raised the shears in his direction, my hands shaking. "Don't come any closer. I'll scream. The neighbors will come." He laughed that dry, humorless laugh I knew so well. "There's no one close enough to hear you." I already checked. I felt my legs give way. I was trapped. "You're coming with me," he continued, advancing another step. "We're going back to the ranch, to our place. We have unfinished business, you and I." "I'm never going back," I replied, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "That ranch isn't my home anymore. The ranch is our home," he shouted, his face contorted with rage. "It's the land of the Morgan family. It's our blood, our heritage." "Your blood isn't Morgan," I retorted without thinking. "The letters prove it. You're not my father's son." It was as if I had thrown oil on a fire. With an animalistic roar, he lunged at me. I tried to hit him with the shears, but he was faster, grabbing my wrist and twisting it until I dropped the improvised weapon. "You don't understand anything," he whispered, his face so close to mine that I could feel his hot breath. "It doesn't matter what those damn letters say. I am a Morgan because I grew up on that land, because I worked it with my hands, because I know every inch of it like I know my own skin." His grip on my wrist was so strong I thought the bones would break. With his other hand, he stroked my face in a grotesquely tender gesture. "And you, Alice, will give me what belongs to me, a son, an heir with legitimate Morgan blood. You ran, but you can't escape your purpose. We are finishing what we started." I tried to struggle, but he was much stronger. He dragged me toward the small room where I slept, throwing me onto the narrow bed. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. That's when we heard voices from outside, many voices, calling my name, and among them, the authoritative voice of a man. "Stephen Morgan, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up." It was Sheriff Miller from Atlanta. "Mrs. Rebecca must have suspected something and alerted the authorities." Stephen froze, looking toward the window like a cornered animal. "It's the end of the line," I said, finding courage from I don't know where. "They know everything. The letters are with them." It was a lie, of course. The letters were stored in a box under my bed, right where we were, but Stephen didn't know that. For a moment, I saw panic in his eyes. Then a strange calm came over him. He let go of my wrist and sat on the edge of the bed, as if he had suddenly lost all his strength. "It doesn't matter," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "It doesn't matter what they know. The land knows me. The land knows who I am." The door was broken down again, this time by police officers. Stephen didn't resist when they took him away. He just looked at me one last time. And in that look, there was something beyond the sick obsession. There was a sadness so deep that for an instant, I almost felt pity. Almost. The following months were filled with depositions, legal proceedings, and sleepless nights. Stephen was initially jailed, but his lawyer, paid with money from the ranch, managed to get him released, citing lack of concrete evidence and temporary mental problems caused by grief. The only condition imposed by the judge was that he could not come near me, under penalty of immediate imprisonment. It was on an afternoon in May 1960 that I received the letter. The paper had the letterhead of the notary's office in Golden Hill. My hands were shaking so much I could barely open the envelope. Inside, an official notification. Red Ash Ranch was being put up for sale by its owner, Stephen Morgan, who was moving to the state of West Virginia. I didn't believe it immediately. It seemed like a trap, another of Stephen's strategies to lure me back. I showed the letter to Sheriff Miller, who promised to verify the information. 2 days later, he came personally to give me the confirmation. "It's true. Your brother is liquidating everything. He's already sold almost all the livestock, the farm equipment, and now the ranch itself is listed. He really seems determined to leave." A part of me felt relief. Another part strangely felt loss. That ranch, despite everything, was the only home I had ever known. The place where my parents lived, where I spent my childhood. The idea of it being sold to strangers caused me unexpected pain, but the fear was still greater. What if it's a trick? I asked the sheriff. What if he's pretending to leave just to make me let my guard down? "I don't think so," he replied, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "From what I've heard, he's drinking heavily, talking to himself in the streets. They say he sometimes spends hours staring at an old portrait crying. The man is broken inside. Broken." The word echoed in my mind. It was exactly how I felt too. Despite being physically safe, something inside me had broken, perhaps forever. In the following weeks, I followed the news about the ranch's sale from a distance. A landowner from another region ended up buying the property for a value well below market. Stephen, it seemed, wanted to get rid of it as quickly as possible. And then, one Sunday morning, as I was returning from the market with Mrs. Rebecca, I saw a man sitting in the town square, staring into space. He was so changed I almost didn't recognize him. Completely white hair, gaunt face, empty eyes. He looked like he had aged 20 years in just a few months. "Stephen." I froze in the middle of the street, my heart pounding. Mrs. Rebecca noticed my reaction and followed my gaze. "It's him," she whispered, squeezing my arm. I nodded, unable to speak. I was ready to turn around and flee when I realized. He had seen me. Our eyes met across the square, but there was nothing in those eyes, no anger, no obsession, not the feverish glint that terrified me so much, just an infinite emptiness. He stood up slowly, like an old man, even though he was only 24 at the time. For a terrible moment, I thought he would come in my direction, but he simply turned his back and walked away, staggering slightly toward the train station. It was the last time I ever saw him. The monster who had ruled my nightmares was just a broken man. I realized then that his obsession had destroyed him far more than it had destroyed me. He had lost everything. I still had a life to live. Years later, I learned from a letter from Sheriff Dennis that Stephen had indeed moved to West Virginia. He worked as a loader at the wholesale market for a few years, until one winter night, drunk as usual, he fell into the river and drowned. No one claimed the body. He was buried as a John Doe, nameless, storyless. When I received the news, I couldn't feel joy, not even relief. Just a deep sadness for all that could have been, and wasn't. It's a complicated grief, isn't it? Not for the monster he became, but for the brother he once was. The threat is finally gone, but as you'll hear, the scars remain. For a family torn apart by secrets, for a land stained with tears, for a brother whom fate had turned into a monster. I stayed in Atlanta for a few more years, learning more and more the seamstress trade, but the shadow of those events never completely left me. On the darkest nights, I still woke up startled, hearing Stephen's voice, whispering about seeds and roots. It was only when I met Martin, a young carpenter who came to fix the roof of Mrs. Rebecca's house, that I slowly began to believe there might be a future for me, a future without fear, without shadows, a future where I could perhaps pull out the roots of evil that had grown so deeply inside me. Even after the last encounter with Stephen in that square, something inside me remained broken. The nights were the worst. I would wake up screaming, drenched in cold sweat, feeling those hands holding me, hearing that obsessed voice talking about blood and seeds. Mrs. Rebecca, with all her kindness, began to sleep on a mattress on the floor of my room to scare away the nightmares, she said, lighting a beeswax candle that perfumed the air with a sweet, calming scent. Martin, the carpenter, became a constant presence in the house. At first he came with the excuse of fixing something, a creaking door, a stuck window. Then he started showing up without pretexts, just to have coffee and chat. He was a quiet man, with large, calloused hands, who spoke little but listened a lot. I grew fond of his calm presence, of the way he never asked about my past, never pressed me to talk about the invisible scars I carried. With him, I could be silent without feeling uncomfortable. But despite these small advances, inside me, there was a knot that wouldn't untie. I was surviving, but not truly living. It was as if a part of me were still trapped on that ranch, in that dark room, under Stephen's threatening shadow. The breaking point came on a stormy night in February 1961. Mrs. Rebecca had traveled to visit a sick daughter in another city. I was alone in the house, sewing by the light of a kerosene lamp, trying to keep my mind busy so as not to hear the thunder that reminded me of Stephen's booming voice when he was enraged. Suddenly, loud knocks on the door. My heart raced, immediate panic taking hold of me. Could it be him again? Had he come back to finish what he started? "Alice, it's me, Martin. Open up, please." I recognized the voice, but I still hesitated. What if it was a trap? What if Stephen had forced Martin to call me? "It's raining hard. I just want to know if you're okay alone in this storm." I approached the door with a pair of shears in my hand, the same ones I once tried to use against Stephen. "How do I know it's really you, Martin?" "Last week you taught me how to cross-stitch on a dish towel with a sunflower's pattern," he replied promptly. "And I told you my fingers were too thick for that delicate work. It was really him." I opened the door with trembling hands. Martin came in, soaked to the bone, water dripping from the hat he held respectfully in his hands. "Sorry to come by unannounced like this," he said, looking embarrassed. "It's just that with Mrs. Rebecca away, and this storm, I got worried." I offered him a towel to dry off, and put water on to heat for tea. We talked about simple things, the church roof he was repairing, a complicated dress I was embroidering for the mayor's daughter. The rain kept falling outside, too hard for him to go home. "If you want, you can sleep in the back room," I offered, feeling a strange mix of fear and comfort at the idea of not spending that stormy night alone. He accepted gratefully. I prepared the simple bed in the small room normally used to store fabrics and threads, and wished him good night. I lay in my bed, listening to the rain. I fell asleep more peacefully, knowing there was someone trustworthy in the house, but the peace didn't last. In the middle of the night, the nightmare came. more vivid than ever. Stephen was there, holding my arms tightly, whispering those horrible words in my ear. I could feel his hot breath, see the sick glint in his eyes, hear the terrible promise. "You belong to me, Alice. The land needs our son." I woke up screaming, fighting against an enemy who wasn't there. Seconds later, Martin appeared at the door holding a kerosene lamp, his face contorted with worry. "Alice, what happened? Are you okay?" I was trembling so much I could barely speak. Tears ran down my face without me being able to stop them. It was as if a dam had burst. All the pain, all the fear I had tried to control for years, just overflowed. "I can't anymore," I sobbed, hugging my own knees. "I can't live like this. Even knowing he's dead, I can't break free." Martin approached cautiously, like someone approaching a wounded animal. He sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. "What do you need to break free from, Alice?" I had never told the full story to anyone. "Fragments. Yes. The sheriff knew parts, Mrs. Rebecca intuited others, but I had never put it all out there, with all the words, the horror I lived at the hands of my own brother. That stormy night, while the wind howled outside, I opened my wounded heart. This is the first time she's given voice to the entire trauma, and she's given it to a man she is terrified to trust. This is a different kind of courage. This is the courage to be vulnerable. I told Martin everything. The death of my parents, Stephen's transformation, the insinuations that became threats, the sick plan to plant his seed in me to prove his belonging to the Morgan family. I told him about the letters I discovered, revealing he wasn't my father's biological son, about his obsession with the land, with the name, with the bloodline, about the constant fear, the nightmares, the feeling that I would never be truly free. Martin listened to it all in silence, his face serious in the flickering light of the kerosene lamp. When I finished, exhausted and empty, I expected to see disgust, pity, or discomfort in his eyes. Instead, I saw only a quiet understanding. "You're carrying a weight that's too heavy, Alice, and you've been carrying it alone for too long." His words, simple and direct, reached something deep inside me. It was true. I hadn't just run from Stephen. I had run from my own story, trying to bury it so deep I'd never have to look at it again. "What he did to you was terrible, but the worst part is what he's still doing," Martin continued, his voice low and firm. "Even dead, he still controls your life through fear. You escaped him physically, but your soul is still trapped on that ranch." I had never thought of it that way, but it was exactly how I felt, as if a part of me had been left behind, chained to that place, to those memories. "How do I break free?" I asked, my voice choked. "How do I get him out of my head?" Martin was silent for a moment, thoughtful. Then he said something that would change everything. "Maybe you need to go back. Go back. To the ranch." The idea horrified me. "Never. I can't. Not to stay," he explained patiently. "To face it. To see that it's just a place, not a prison. To show yourself that those walls no longer have power over you." I shook my head, terrified. The mere thought of setting foot in that place again made me feel like I couldn't breathe. "I can't do that alone," I murmured. "And you don't have to," he replied simply. "I'll go with you." I looked at him, surprised. "Why? Why do you care so much?" Martin lowered his head, fixing his gaze on his own calloused hands resting on his knees. "Because I know what it's like to carry that kind of pain. My father drank a lot, and when he drank, his voice cracked, but he didn't need to finish. He hadn't lived my story, but he knew his own monsters. The understanding passed between us like a silent electric current. We didn't make any decisions that night, but something had changed inside me. The seed of an idea, ironic to think of it that way, considering everything had been planted. Maybe Martin was right. Maybe the only way to free myself was to face the past head-on, to look the monster in the eyes one last time. In the following weeks, the idea grew, taking shape. I found out, through letters exchanged with the former Sheriff Dennis, that Red Ash Ranch had been bought by a family from Miami who rarely visited, keeping only an elderly caretaker to watch over the property. There's almost nothing left from your parents' time, the sheriff wrote. They sold almost everything, tore down part of the old house to build a new one. In a way, that gave me courage. It wouldn't be the exact same place from my memories. Maybe it would be possible to revisit it without being consumed by the past. On a Sunday afternoon, 3 months after that stormy night, I told Martin my decision. I want to go back, to see the ranch one last time. Would you still go with me? His smile was answer enough. The trip was planned carefully. Mrs. Rebecca, who by now knew my story, lent us some money for the bus ticket to Golden Hill. From there, we would rent horses to get to the ranch. On the eve of our departure, I couldn't sleep. The nightmares returned with full force. Stephen chasing me through the hallways of the house, repeating his horrible promise, his hands reaching out to grab me. I woke up screaming as I had so many times before, but this time something was different. Instead of cowering in fear, I felt a growing anger for still allowing him to have so much power over me, even in death. Anger for all the stolen years, all the lost nights of sleep, all the peace I was denied. Enough, I whispered into the darkness of the room. Enough of being afraid. The bus ride was long and uncomfortable. Martin sat beside me, respecting my silence, offering his solid presence like a safe harbor. When we arrived at the bus stop in Golden Hill, I felt my stomach churn. The small town seemed frozen in time, practically identical to the one I had left years ago. A few older people recognized me despite the years that had passed. Curious glances followed us as we walked to the small motel where we would spend the night before heading to the ranch. The Morgan girl is back, I heard someone whisper to another. The one from that strange case with her brother. Martin noticed my discomfort and gently placed his hand on my shoulder. Ignore them. They don't know anything. At the motel, I was careful to book separate rooms. My reputation was already compromised enough, without adding the scandal of traveling alone with a man. But that night, when the nightmares came, it was the soft knock on my room door and Martin's worried voice on the other side that brought me back to reality. I'm fine, I answered, my voice still trembling. Just a bad dream. Do you want me to stay out here in the hallway? He asked. Just so you know, you're not alone. The offer was so sincere, so devoid of ulterior motives, that I felt tears in my eyes. That's not necessary. Tomorrow will be a hard day. You need to rest. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat by the window, watching the stars and trying to gather courage for what was to come. In the morning, we rented horses from a local rancher. The road to Red Ash Ranch was better than I remembered. They had built a bridge over the creek we used to have to ford. When we finally spotted the gates of the ranch, I felt a tightness in my chest so strong I thought I might faint. Martin, sensing my reaction, moved his horse closer. We can go back if you want, he said softly. It doesn't have to be today. I took a deep breath, smelling the familiar air of that land, the smell of damp grass, of freshly turned earth, of pine resin in the distance. So many memories, not all of them bad. My parents also lived there, loved there, dreamed there. I didn't answer, strengthening my resolve. It has to be today. The caretaker, an elderly man named Samuel, received us with initial suspicion. But when I explained who I was, the daughter of the former owners, his expression softened. Ah, the Morgan girl. I've heard about you. Do you want to take a look at the house? The house was different from what I remembered. The new family had knocked down several interior walls, opening up spaces, bringing in more light. The kitchen where my mother used to sing her nursery rhymes while cooking now had modern cabinets and a gas stove instead of the old wood-fired stove. But it was when I entered what used to be Stephen's room that I felt as if time had stood still. It was now a living room with different furniture, different colored walls, but something about the floorboards, the shape of the window, instantly transported me back to that terrible night. Martin must have noticed my expression as he quietly approached. Are you okay? I wasn't. I felt my legs give out, the air leaving my lungs. It was as if Stephen were there, invisible but present, his ghost floating in the air I was breathing. I need to get out, I managed to murmur. We went out to the porch, where I breathed deeply, trying to calm my racing heart. The caretaker, perhaps sensing I needed a moment, invited us to walk through the orchard while he made some coffee. It was there, among the old pecan trees my father had planted, that the dam finally broke. I saw the very tree where Stephen and I used to play as innocent children, and I didn't just cry for the terrified girl I was. I cried for the brother I lost long before he became a monster. I cried for the parents who left us. It was a deep, ancient sadness, a grieving for the life that should have been. Martin stood by my side, not speaking, just a constant, steady presence. When the tears finally stopped, I looked around at the house, at the fields, the land that had haunted my nightmares for years. "It's strange," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's just dirt. It's just a house. It seems so small now. It's not terrifying at all. You see? A place has no power. It's our memories and our fear that give it power. When I stood there, I took my power back. The monster didn't live in that house. He had been living in my head. And finally, I had evicted him. In that moment, the ghost of Stephen, the power he held over me, it didn't just fade, it vanished. The land hadn't held me prisoner. My fear had. And I was finally letting it go. This is the true turning point. The monster didn't live in that house. He had been living in her head. By facing the past, Alice finally evicted him. The things that terrify us as children usually seem smaller when we face them as adults, Martin replied. We continued walking through the orchard, then through the fields that were once tobacco and were now replanted with corn. With every step, every breath, I felt like I was reclaiming something I had lost. Not the land itself, but my right to memories untainted by fear. Near the end of the afternoon, we said goodbye to the caretaker and mounted the horses again. Before leaving through the gate, I stopped and looked one last time toward the house in the distance. "He's dead," I said aloud. Not for Martin, but for myself. And this land has no power over me. It was true. Stephen was dead, his body resting nameless in some distant cemetery. The ranch now belonged to others, and I could finally begin to belong to myself. On the way back to Atlanta, something fundamental had changed. The nightmares didn't stop overnight, but when they came, they no longer held power. They were just echoes. I had faced the monster's lair, and it was empty. Weeks later, sitting with Martin, I finally understood. "For years I've been trying to pull out the roots Stephen planted," I told him. "Those twisted roots of fear and bloodlines. But visiting the ranch, I realized I can't pull them out. They're part of my story." I looked at my hands, the hands that had learned to sew, to build a new life. But I can plant something new around them. Something stronger. Martin took my hand, his own calloused from his carpentry. "Then let's plant a garden, Alice, a future that is yours, defined by what you grow, not by what tried to poison the soil." At that moment, I turned to the man who had been my anchor, my guardian angel in the truest sense. "Will you help me plant that future?" His smile was the answer I needed. And so, from the scorched earth that Stephen left in my heart, I slowly began to cultivate something new, something that, unlike the sick roots of the past, could one day bloom. After that conversation in the park in Atlanta, my life began to take a completely different course. Martin and I grew closer and closer, with a respect I had never experienced before. He understood my silences, respected my fears, and never pressured me for anything. Our courtship was slow and cautious. In the first few months, we didn't even hold hands in public. Mrs. Rebecca, ever watchful, served as our chaperone on walks around the city. At night, we would talk on the porch of her house under her watchful eye, as she pretended to sew, but, in reality, didn't miss a word we said. Martin told me more about his life. Born into a humble family in rural Georgia, he lost his mother when he was young and was raised by his father, a bitter man who took out his life's frustrations on drinking and on his son. He ran away from home at 16, learned the carpentry trade from a master in Atlanta, and had been living off his work ever since, building a reputation as an honest and skilled man. "I understand what it's like to carry scars no one sees," he told me one night. "But I also know we can choose not to let them define who we are. In mid-1962, almost a year after our trip to the ranch, Martin asked me to marry him. It was a simple proposal, without grand gestures. We were sitting on Mrs. Rebecca's porch, watching the drizzle fall. "Alice," he said, his voice a little shaky, which was rare for a man usually so sure of himself. "I don't have much to offer besides my hands and my heart, but if you'll have me, we can build a life together, a new life, far from here if you prefer." I accepted without hesitation. It wasn't a passionate love like in the novels I sometimes read. It was something calmer, deeper, a mutual understanding, a commitment to care for each other, to build something good on the ruins our pasts had left. We got married in a small ceremony at the church in Atlanta, with only Mrs. Rebecca and a few close friends. I wore a simple dress I sewed with my own hands, light blue, bearing no resemblance to that blue dress Stephen forced me to wear years ago. Our married life began modestly in a small rented room in the back of the carpentry shop where Martin worked. We didn't have much, but we had peace, something that, for me, was worth more than any wealth. At first, I still struggled with the nightmares. There were nights when I woke up screaming, my body drenched in cold sweat. Martin, always patient, would light a kerosene lamp and sit beside me, not touching, just talking softly until I calmed down. He never judged me for it, never showed impatience. "Deep wounds take time to heal," he would say. In 1963, we received news that took us by surprise. Mrs. Joyce, Sheriff Dennis's wife, who had helped me so much in the past, had passed away. The sheriff, now retired and alone, decided to move south, to his brother's house. Before leaving, he sought me out with an unexpected proposal. "I have a small farm near Asheville, North Carolina," he explained. "It was going to be our retirement spot, mine and Joyce's. Now, without her." His voice cracked, and he cleared his throat before continuing. "I want to sell it, but not to just anyone. I thought of you too. Martin is good with his hands. He could make that place flourish. The idea of leaving Georgia, of truly starting from scratch in a place where no one knew my story, was tempting." I talked to Martin that same night. "What do you think?" I asked, anxious for his answer. "It would be a big change," he smiled. That calm smile that centered me so much. "Do you want to go?" "I want a new life," I answered honestly. "I want to plant new roots in clean soil, without ghosts." The decision was made. We sold what little we had. We said goodbye to Mrs. Rebecca with tears and promises of visits and headed south toward an unknown land that offered us the chance to start over. Sheriff Dennis's farm was small, but it had potential. It was about 10 miles from the city of Asheville, in a mountainous region where the climate was much more pleasant than in Georgia. The main house was simple: 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and an outhouse. There was a shed that Martin soon transformed into a carpentry shop and enough land for a generous vegetable garden and a few animals. It was there, on that little piece of land, that I began to get interested in medicinal plants. All thanks to our closest neighbor, Mrs. Naomi was an elderly Cherokee woman who lived alone in a cabin about a mile from our property. Mrs. Naomi appeared at our door one cool July morning, bringing a bundle of fresh herbs. "To welcome," she said, with her strong accent and short sentences. "Good for tea, warms the body, chases away sadness." I became fascinated with her knowledge of the local plants. At first, she was reserved, answering my questions with few words, but little by little, as I gained her trust, she began to teach me. "This here is chamomile," she would show, picking a small plant with yellowish flowers. "Good for stomachache, for nerves. Also, only pick during the waning moon, or it loses its strength." I began to accompany her on her walks through the woods, learning to identify each herb, each root, each bark. I learned not only what they were for, but how to gather them, how to dry them, how to prepare the remedies. It was ancestral knowledge, passed down from generation to generation, that she was now sharing with me. "Why are you teaching me all this?" I asked one day as we were returning from a long gathering walk. She looked at me with those dark, deep eyes that seemed to see far beyond the surface. "Because you have old pain in your soul. Herbs heal the body, but they also heal the soul. And you will need to heal many others later. I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. Only years later would I realize how prophetic her words were. Our life in Asheville was good for a few years. Martin established his carpentry shop and soon gained a reputation for his well-made furniture. I divided my time between taking care of the house, maintaining a small vegetable garden, and cultivating my medicinal herb garden, which grew every year. I started making small homemade remedies, teas for coughs, salves for wounds, tinctures for insomnia, at first just for our family and close neighbors. Then the word spread, and people began to come from further away to seek out my preparations. In 1965, our first son was born, Adam, a healthy boy with rosy cheeks who filled our house with joy. 2 years later, our daughter Lily came. Martin was a loving and present father who carried the children on his shoulders when he came back from the workshop, told stories before bed, taught them their first letters. With the children came a new dimension of healing for me. Each of their smiles, each discovery, each little hug was like a small piece of my heart being restored. The cycle of fear and trauma that Stephen tried to perpetuate was being broken, replaced by a cycle of love and care. However, it wasn't all roses. In the particularly harsh winter of 1969, Mrs. Naomi fell gravely ill. Despite all the remedies I tried, all the knowledge she herself had passed on to me, nothing could save her. Before she passed, she called me to her side and held my hands with a surprising strength for someone so weakened. "Keep the knowledge," she whispered. "Pass it on. The plants talk to you. Listen." Her death left an immense void in me. More than a neighbor or mentor, she had become a friend. Perhaps the first true friend I'd had since Sadie in my distant childhood. I honored her memory in the only way I knew how, by deepening my studies of medicinal plants, documenting every detail I had learned from her, adding my own discoveries. It was also in 1969, after Mrs. Naomi's death, that we began to feel the limits of our life in Asheville. The extremely damp climate affected the children's health, who suffered from frequent bronchitis. Martin's carpentry shop faced increasing competition from a furniture factory that set up in the region. "Maybe it's time to consider another place," Martin suggested one night, as we discussed our worries by the light of a kerosene lamp. "A place a little drier for the children, maybe with more opportunities." That's how we began to consider a move to Florida. An acquaintance of Martin's had settled in Palm Coast, a city in the northern part of the state, and spoke wonders of the region. A milder climate than Asheville, fertile land, and a growing economy. In mid-1970, we made our second big move. We sold the farm in Asheville for a good price. The region had increased in value in the years we lived there, and we bought a small property on the outskirts of Palm Coast. It was a larger house, with a good yard where I could establish an even more complete herb garden and enough land for Martin to build a more spacious workshop. The adjustment was easier. This time, the children, still young, quickly made friends at the local school. Martin found a receptive market for his handcrafted furniture, especially among the region's wealthier families. And I, to my surprise, discovered a growing demand for my knowledge of medicinal plants. What began as a small herb garden for personal use gradually transformed into a true center for natural healing. People from several cities in the region began to seek me out, first with simple problems like coughs and headaches, then with more complex issues. "Ma'am, are you a healer?" they sometimes asked, and I always denied it. "No, I just know the plants and what they can do for the body and soul. The rest is nature's work." And what moved me deeply was realizing how many women came to me with invisible wounds, similar to the ones I had carried for so long. Women who suffered abuse, who lived in homes where fear was constant, who carried old traumas like stones in their chests. For these women, in addition to the herbs that relieved physical symptoms, insomnia, headaches, lack of appetite, I offered something more, an ear. I would sit with them on my porch, prepare a chamomile or lemon balm tea, and simply listen to their stories without judging, without pushing. Many times, it was the first time these women had ever spoken about what they were living through. And I knew, from my own experience, how that simple act of getting it out, of naming the monster, was already part of the cure. "How is it that you seem to understand so well?" a young wife asked me once, after revealing the abuse she suffered from her husband. I hesitated for a moment, considering whether I should share my own story. Until then, few people in Palm Coast knew my past. It was a guarded secret, a turned page. But looking into the eyes of that young woman, so similar to what I once was, I understood what Mrs. Naomi meant years ago. "You will need to heal many others later." "I also carried a heavy weight for a long time," I finally replied. "I also knew fear, shame, and the feeling of being trapped. But I learned that it's possible to pull out the roots of evil, even the deepest ones. This is how healing becomes whole. She's taking the very poison that nearly killed her and turning it into medicine for others. This is the lesson, and it's why her story had to be told. If Alice's journey has touched you, subscribe, because there are more truths that need to be spread." It was the first time I shared my story in Palm Coast, but it wouldn't be the last. Little by little, as trust grew, I discovered that my experience, as painful as it had been, could serve as a light for other women in similar situations. It wasn't just about the medicinal herbs, although they remained important. It was about showing that it was possible to survive, to heal, to rebuild, that after the storm, calm could come. Martin fully supported this work. "You are transforming your pain into purpose," he told me one night, as we were drying a new batch of herbs together. "It's the most powerful form of healing." The years went by. Our children grew up, went to school, built their own lives. Adam followed in his father's footsteps in carpentry, while Lily became a teacher and moved to the state capital. In 1985, after 23 years of a quiet and loving marriage, I received the news I never wanted to hear. Martin, my safe harbor, my life partner, was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. None of my herbs, none of my knowledge could save him. In the months that followed, I cared for him, with all the love he had taught me to feel again. When he passed, on a rainy October afternoon, he was at peace, surrounded by his children and me. "You'll be okay, Alice." Those were his last words, whispered with difficulty. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." The pain of the loss was immense, different from any other I had ever felt. But even in that moment, I discovered there was a crucial difference between this pain and the one I carried for so long after Stephen's abuse. This one, however intense, was clean. It was the price of having truly loved. There was no shame, no fear, only longing and gratitude for all that we lived together. I continued my work with the plants and with the women who sought me out. My house on the outskirts of Palm Coast, with its wide porch and herb garden, became a well-known point of refuge. Over the years, I had the joy of seeing grandchildren being born, growing up, bringing new life and hope to our family. Today, at 82, I look back and see how far I've come from that terrified girl who fled Red Ash Ranch. The last time I heard about that place was about 20 years ago, when a traveler passing through Palm Coast mentioned that the Golden Hill region had changed a lot, that the old Morgan Ranch, as they still called it, had been broken up and sold off by the county. I felt a strange peace knowing this. It was as if the last vestige of that story had finally transformed into something new, just as I myself had transformed. The root of evil that Stephen planted, that sick obsession with blood and lineage, with possessing the land and everything that lived on it, had finally been completely ripped out. In its place, other roots, of love, of healing, of purpose, had grown strong and deep. And so, here I am, an old woman on her porch, surrounded by healing herbs, with wrinkled hands that have already eased so much suffering, telling a story that could have destroyed me, but instead ended up defining me in a way I never imagined possible. Every morning, I wake up with the first rays of sun, make my strong black coffee, and go straight to my medicinal herb garden. I have more than 50 different species organized in beds that my son Adam built with his own hands. Each plant has its little sign indicating the name and main uses. People still seek me out for homemade remedies. "Mrs. Alice, do you have something for my arthritis?" asks Mr. Ramon every week. "Mrs. Alice, my son can't sleep," says a young mother. I separate a mixture of chamomile and lemon balm, explaining how to prepare it. But the work that gives me the most satisfaction is welcoming women who are suffering. For them, I offer more than herbs. I offer my own story as proof that it's possible to rebuild a life. And when I see in their eyes that first spark of hope, I feel that all my suffering was not in vain. My family is my greatest joy. Adam lives right here in Palm Coast, not far. He continued his father's tradition in carpentry and has a small artisanal furniture factory. He married Rachel and gave me 2 wonderful grandchildren, Julia and Mateo, both already adults. Lily, my daughter, followed another path. She graduated as a teacher, moved to the state capital, and teaches literature at the university. She married a fellow professor and gave me 1 more grandson, Zachary, who is now 28 and a fine young man. Sundays are special because Adam and his family always come to eat with me. We spend the afternoon on the porch drinking sweet tea and talking. There's a peace in these family gatherings that's hard to explain to someone who doesn't know my story. It's as if every laugh, every hug is a silent victory over the past. Julia, my oldest granddaughter, seems to have inherited my interest in plants. She graduated with a degree in biology and studies medicinal plants. Sometimes she spends days with me, and we stay for hours in the garden, exchanging knowledge. She with her modern science, me with my traditional wisdom. "Grandma, you should write a book," she always says. For now, I'm content with documenting everything in large notebooks with detailed drawings of each plant. I always tell her, "This will be for you when I'm gone." It's my most precious inheritance. I also have a cherished group of friends my age. We meet every Thursday for coffee and chat. When it's my turn to host them, I make savory herb scones that they adore. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I think about Stephen, not with fear or anger like before, but with a distant compassion. I haven't completely forgiven him. Some things are beyond human forgiveness, but I learned not to let hatred take up space in my heart. Instead, I chose to plant other seeds of love, of compassion, of healing. And today, looking at the life I built, the family I created, the people I helped, I feel that those seeds blossomed in ways I could never have imagined in those dark days of my youth. Here in Palm Coast, I found not only a home, but a mission. The terrified girl who fled a ranch in North Florida transformed into a woman who managed to make her scars not a mark of shame, but a map that can guide other women to find their own path to the light. My past does not define me, but it gave me my purpose. I learned that the only way to defeat a monster isn't to run from it, but to turn the very pain it inflicted into power. Where Stephen planted seeds of fear, I chose to grow a garden of healing. If you are trapped, remember this. You cannot change what happened, but you have complete control over what grows from the ashes. Turn your scars into seeds. This is my lesson, and I tell it in the hope it will help someone. If you want to hear more stories of truth and healing, please subscribe.